Alistair McLeod had a new article come out just the other day. It was on Zero Hedge. The end of the LBMA is nigh. This is based on Basel III. So, new regulations scheduled to be introduced for European banks at the end of June and in the UK from January 1st, affecting all LBMA member banks, affecting London's unallocated gold trading market. And I'll quote him, he says, as it is unwound, the withdrawal of synthetic supply has enormous implications for future precious metals prices by transferring pricing power to physical markets.
Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics. And I have a very special treat for my beautiful audience today, all these silver lovers out there, because someone that has played a great role in what's gone on in bringing some integrity or at least attention back to the markets and the lack of integrity, and helped me quite a bit on my journey. And I'm pleased to have Sean from the SGT Report joining me on the show today. It's unfortunate that other outlets don't appreciate Sean as much as I think he should be appreciated, or I won't speak for anyone else, but just as I think of the things, working on Wall Street was infinitely easier than getting a YouTube channel up and cranking. So I really have a lot of admiration for what Sean has done, and being a teacher on my own journey. And with that said, a pleasure to welcome on in Sean, SGT Report. Sean, how are you doing, buddy?
Hey, Chris, I'm doing good. Thank you so much. I appreciate the kind words. And, I did probably move a little too far away from the precious metals talk in recent years as I've spent more time trying to expose the pedophiles and the child traffickers. But I do still talk about the manipulation of our honest money, of real money. And that might be why, I'm not brought up as much in the circles that you're referring to. But it cost me dearly to be talking about those other issues and exposing the pedophiles and the child traffickers because YouTube didn't like it, so they took away my channel on October 15th. And then Patreon followed suit a week later. So Twitter on the back of that about 2 weeks after that. I mean, the hits keep coming, man. They don't like any of us talking about truth, but as long as they still have control of the COMEX and the paper markets, I guess they don't really mind we the people talking about silver and gold.
Well, it's a fascinating dynamic, the things that are going on out there. And I don't think they're unconnected myself. And I think that's why there's been so much resistance around this gold and silver manipulation, why it seems to me to be a lot more pervasive than perhaps I even realized early on. Although that was one of the things that caught my attention back then, listening to gold and silver folks on shows like yours, where even that meeting in 2010 with the CFTC, where it almost seemed like they've been going out of their way to ignore the evidence. And Sean, it's great to have you here because I know you've talked to more people than just about anyone on the planet about this issue in the past decade or even longer. So I bet people would love to hear, based on everything that you get access to, what do you think is happening and how do you think this is going to play out?
Well, you know what? I see you have the Sunday Night Slam there, that chart behind you. And what year was that? Was that 2012?
Well, it's 2011.
2011. I remember it like it was yesterday. I know it was a Sunday night, and we had ridden silver up to very close to 50, 49 and change, 48 and change, and then JP Morgan slammed the hell out of it, $6. I tell you, a waterfall event like that, we see it in Bitcoin now more recently, but no, we've seen that repeated behavior in the silver and gold market, and the question is, will it ever end? And I do want to ask you at some point during this call about the end of the LBMA is nigh. That's a new article from Alistair McLeod talking about Basel III regulations being implemented here at the end of June for European banks. So we can talk about that, but I wanted to offer something anecdotal about what we're seeing because, again, it's just it outrages me, man. It makes my blood boil that silver is still trading at 27, 28, 29. It's just so ridiculous when every other commodity is soaring through the roof. Lumber prices up 600% in recent months. Let me do a screen share here. This is the anecdotal part. So This is coinflation.com, and for those who don't know, and many of you probably do, they took the silver out of our real money, out of our quarters and dimes and stuff, and the 50-cent pieces back in the mid 60s. I think it was 1967, maybe 66, right in that range, if memory serves. And then bad money drives out good money. So what happened? Well, you can't find silver dollars, you can't find silver quarters in the money supply anymore. Well, guess what? Same thing's happening to copper. So in 1982 and prior, halfway through 1982, I should say, all of the pennies were copper. So every time you guys get change, you get change at the store, if you still use cash, take a look for the copper ones, pull them aside, put them in a bag. Now, Chris, I used to, when my kids were little, 7, 8 years old, I used to get boxes of pennies from my local bank, and we would go through those boxes of pennies together, and we'd find the copper ones, we'd take them out, and we'd put them in a bag, okay? And back then, that wasn't that long ago, Chris. That was, boy, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 years ago. And I did videos about this at the time. You could pull the copper pennies out, and you'd find somewhere in the neighborhood of, I estimate, between 30 and 40% of all the pennies in a box of $25 worth of pennies, $2,500 pennies. You'd find 30 to 40% of them were copper. Well, each one of those pennies today is not worth a penny, it's worth 3 pennies. Okay? Well, guess what? I just went to the bank 2 days ago to do this test again, and I knew I was in trouble right away driving home, well, walking out of the bank. It was a box of pennies, the likes of which I've never seen before. I'll come back to you in that screen share.
It
It's a
was made out of
perforated box.
SLV shares.
Yeah, it's a perforated box of pennies so you could see each row of pennies, right?
Yeah.
So 50 rows of pennies, 50 perforated holes. So you could see, and I could see they were all brand new zinc pennies. And I thought, oh boy. So I took them home, I opened up the box, and sure enough, every single roll was a brand newly minted roll of zinc pennies. So I'm sure these came right from the Federal Reserve down the street from this bank. And the point is that even the copper is being driven out of our money. Bad money drives out good money. And so you can't even go to your bank and get a mixed box of pennies, some of which at this point should still be copper. So I don't know if that's the case with all boxes of pennies coming in, but that was my experience with the one box they'd sell me. And by the way, they said in the future, Sean, if you'd like to get boxes of pennies, you're going to have to come in and you're going to have to order them. You can get as many boxes as you'd like, and then we get them a week later from the Fed. So I'm starting to suspect the Federal Reserve themselves is pulling out all of the copper pennies.
Well, I mean, it's kind of funny. Jeff Curry of Goldman Sachs, he claimed that copper is now the greatest conductor of electricity in history. So, I mean, maybe in the way like you had back in the 80s, you know, people would strip out the copper wiring when times are tough. Maybe that's the bankers' plan. They're just like strip out the copper from all the pennies to raise some bucks after their paper silver scheme collapses. And Sean, you also mentioned when they stopped with the silver in the coins. I was actually reading about that this morning because the last year they had silver in the coins was 1964, which was interesting, right after JFK died in 63. And then you had LBJ come along, who was, I'm in Austin for another couple of days. He's a hero down around these parts, it seems like. But I mean, you see the same thing. Whether it was the Romans taking the metal out of the coin, or LBJ, or the collapse of the London gold pool, or what we're seeing now, it's the same play over and over again. And you commented how really the only move the government has is to do a pump and dump like they did, as you were saying, with Bitcoin yesterday.
Oh, yeah. You know, I just mentioned to you that that was on our pre-call. I said, yeah, the criminal Federal Reserve and their collection arm, the IRS. People, I mean, this is so insane. We've jumped the shark in this country. It's so authoritarian and tyrannical that this illegitimate president wants to empower the IRS with $80 billion so they can crawl up the asses of all American taxpayers to, as he says, because he doesn't want a deficit spend. Are you kidding me? So he wants to
Yeah, bro.
audit taxpayers to fund his illegitimate spending and illegitimate government when they print the stuff out of thin air. It's just atrocious. And now Janet Yellen is basically threatening crypto people for the same exact thing. more audits unless you fully comply, blah, 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 blah.
Was that
It's just,
before or after she said interest rates were going up 2 weeks ago?
well, this is news today. Bitcoin tumbles after Treasury unveils stricter crypto reporting to IRS. I won't bore you with the details, but I mean, it's just so sick. I mean, these people are so sick. And the power elite, they all hide their money. They don't pay taxes. They've all got offshore, corporations set up in, God knows where, the Bahamas. And it's just, again, it's like, I think what frustrates everybody, I just did an interview with Sophia Smallstorm that I posted last night. She's a researcher. She's the mind behind the documentary 9/11 Mysteries. And in her latest newsletter, she came up with this term, or discovered this term, moral injury. And moral injury is what we're all feeling when we feel betrayed by our leaders, right? In this case, maybe in the case of the experimental biological agents masquerading as vaccines. I mean, all of these leaders are pushing these on us, telling us that they're safe and effective, and it's the only way to get back to normal. Well, that's moral injury for those of us that know the truth, and we try to warn our friends, neighbors, and colleagues, and they go take the damn jab anyway. That's appalling, right? That affects it hits us in the gut, in the soul of our being. That's called moral injury, which I thought was really interesting. And I think the same is true with taxes. These people print it out of thin air. We all know it. But they still want us to pay our taxes as they inflate our dollars. And by the way, the fiat dollars, we trade our labor, we trade our bodies for that fiat. We willingly go to work and we exchange our labor, the fruits of our labor, our bodies, for their fiat that they're inflating away. That is moral indignation that you're hearing from me, because I feel morally injured by this criminal system.
Yeah, well, I mean, Sean, I'm just going to come right out, lay it on the table, and the question everybody wants to know: can we sue the LBMA for moral injury? Break it down. What do the investors? What can you tell us here?
So I wanted to ask you about that. Alistair McLeod had a new article come out just the other day. It was on Zero Hedge. The end of the LBMA is nigh. This is based on Basel III. So, new regulations scheduled to be introduced for European banks at the end of June, and in the UK from January 1st, affecting all LBMA member banks, affecting London's unallocated gold trading market. And I'll quote him, he says, "As it is unwound, the withdrawal of synthetic supply has enormous implications for future precious metals prices by transferring pricing power to physical markets, now dominated by China." And then that reminded me of my video that I made this years ago. You can find it on YouTube now. Silver Doctors reposted it in 2016, but I think I made it in probably 2011 or 12. And the name of the video is "The Curious Case for $936 an ounce silver." And in that video, have you seen that one?
No, but I want to, and how cool is
Well,
I get a sneak peek with the maker?
a little inside baseball. I'm not going to play me talking because it kind of nauseates me. I've got this very low voice, and
Ah, no,
no, no,
Sean,
no, no.
all
I
these
don't mean
women in the
manipulating.
audience are
I had a
excited right now.
I had a quiet voice because
Sounds
back
sexy.
then my kids were little and they were all upstairs sleeping, and I would do my work at night, and so I try to be quiet doing my work and my voiceovers. But anyway, this is Adrian Douglas from GATA, God rest his soul, and this was his take, okay, on gold and where gold should be priced way back in 2011 or 12. And at that time, Chris, the national debt of the United States was 14 trillion. Listen to this.
The supply of gold has been artificially increased by this paper gold to what I think is something like 45 times the actual supply. So that means that when that is exposed and people are asking for gold that isn't there, the potential is that gold's purchasing power will be multiplied by 45 times in rough terms.
All right, I'll pause it there. Sorry, I don't have that clean, so you got to suffer through the music there. But yeah, that was Adrian Douglas back then, and he thought it was 45 times more paper gold than physical. I know for a fact that number's far higher now, Chris. What are you hearing? I mean, well, look, we have Jeffrey Christian admitting it's 100 to 1, right? Paper gold and paper silver. That he says silver trades just like a commodity, or just like a derivative, 100 to 1 paper to gold, paper to physical, and that was back in his 2010 testimony to the CFTC, I think.
Yeah, and I mean that was before Silver Tuesday, where they had to hammer so much paper on the market that because the LBMA said they were afraid of running out of metal. So how many contracts did it take? That's why it'd be nice if the CFTC answered, which I don't expect they'll do, but I did actually. It's something I've been wanting to do some calculations on. I mean, I don't know that there's a set way to calculate it, but actually, Sean, how about I see your Adrian Douglas and re-raise you that Dr. Mark Skidmore now has found he's up to $145 trillion of missing money. And we still, every other bullion dealer that does storage I know of, they let their customers do an audit or they have some audit facility. Yet we have Fort Knox. So we don't know how many dollars are out there. We don't know how much gold is left. So it's like analyzing Enron's numbers when you know they're fraudulent. Like, okay, I sit here and read people quoting the CPI. I mean, even the CPI, even the rig numbers are 4.2% for the freaking inflation, and here's Jerome Powell saying, oh, well, it's still transitory. Well, that lumber chart over the last year didn't look so transitory to me. I mean, when is it going to come down? Like, isn't this the same thing Bernanke was telling us?
Well, again, I mean, that's the moral injury and the moral outrage comes from statements like inflation is transitory.
I want to sue whoever came up with that and like disseminated that to the media. Whoever said that, maybe Powell, but maybe we can get a lawsuit. Whatever idiot said something that silly the first time.
I think what I'm most concerned about is that all of this is coordinated. And I posted a video on my site, thephaser.com, I don't know, more than a week ago now, but it was called Monopoly. The full name escapes me. I think if you search through there, you can find it. But yeah, there's thephaser.com. But that video was really important. It did a really great job. It was like a little mini documentary, and it talked about the shareholders of all the major corporations. And that's all public. You can go and find out. And what you see repeatedly is the two top shareholders in almost every corporation you can think of. Be they restaurants, be they big pharma companies, be they lumber companies, it doesn't matter. Pick your poison. You're going to find that the two largest shareholders are typically, or at least in the top three or four, are always Vanguard and BlackRock. And BlackRock, unlike Vanguard, is private. You cannot tell who those shareholders are. So in my view, think Rothschild, Rockefeller, Morgan, think those old world banking things.
I think I know Vanguard was in the meeting setting the futures market structure that the CFTC was voting on. I believe BlackRock popped up there too. Obviously, JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs. So I'm sure they're, applying to be in BlackRock's club on some of these deals,
Yeah, and
Senior position.
Yeah, the point made in that video, and I think it's excellent, is that these boards of directors of these corporations all have similar, they all sit on each other's boards, okay? And they're all owned by the same mega wealthy people. And so when you think about what they're doing with the coordination of Event 201, which predicted this COVID breakout in these vaccines 3 months before it happened, and that was coordinated, that Event 201 was put on by the World Economic Forum, Bill and what's her freaking name? Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and Johns Hopkins. Okay, and it predicted exactly what we're going through now. And then what do we see? The 2010 Rockefeller document, lockstep, where they wargamed the same exact thing, a pandemic, and they said, the world would move together under more authoritarian top-down control. That was 2010, and we're seeing it all now. Well, what explains that kind of conspiracy and that kind of lockstep? Well, if the central bankers have long bought up everything of value and they own these corporations, and all of these toxic, corrupt people are at the tops of these corporations and they all sit on each other's boards of directors, I mean, is it any wonder that they're getting away with pushing an experimental biological agent on the public, which, according to the VAERS, the Vaccine Adverse Injury Reporting System, has now killed over 4,500 people with over 100,000 injuries. And it's widely acknowledged that the VAERS reporting system only reflects 1 to 10% of all injured people. I mean, That's the conspiracy, man. And these people operate our monetary system.
Yeah, and in fact, it seems like Fauci reads from the same script that the Federal Reserve does. It was interesting. There was someone in Congress was asking him, what is the metric or the number? Or how would you know when it's safe to go outside? When deaths or infections go below what rate? And he just wouldn't answer the question. It reminded me exactly of the Fed when it's like, all right, what has to happen before you actually raise interest rates? Not before Janet Yellen talks about raising interest rates. You see the markets move, and then next day the inflation print comes out, and everybody forgets, like, oh, well, of course we're not going to raise interest rates. But again, as you've mentioned, whether it's Bitcoin, silver, Sean, it's hitting me as I see this accelerate in the midst of more attention on it than ever, that maybe this is actually the only thing Wall Street has ever done. Whether it's the Rothschilds and what was it, the Battle of Waterloo, or
Yeah.
where throw one headline out there. What we saw with Trump: trade wars on, trade wars off. Well, great. If that headline's coming out, that's pretty darn valuable information. And Sean, you're one of the people who finds out that they all know each other. They're owned by the same guys.
Yeah, you mentioned the Battle of Waterloo. For those that don't know, YouTube is proud to host it. You can go search for it there. Search for, I think the name of the movie, I think it's an MGM movie, and it was made in, I don't know, I want to say 1930 something, maybe 1939, maybe earlier, but it's on YouTube, the House of Rothschild. I should look it up while we're talking. I'll try to find it here in a minute when you're talking. And it documents exactly what happened. They helped fund that movie. I forget, was it Boris Karloff? Whoever plays Rothschild in that movie is a famous actor, one of the most famous actors of the time. And the whole movie is about the Rothschilds, and they're very proud of what happened there during the Battle of Waterloo. When he sold, right, he had the fastest horses and the best communication network, and when he started selling, there's a waterfall event, just like the chart behind you. He caused that waterfall event of selling to happen because people thought that meant that England had lost, and the opposite was true. The English the British Army had defeated Napoleon. Okay, but his selling made the reverse seem true. So over 2 days, everything sold off some 80 to 90%, and he brags about buying it all up, pennies on the dollar. That's what these people do, man. They've been doing it to our markets forever too.
Sean, would one be able to draw any parallels between what you just described and perhaps how a silver investor might have felt after finally hearing that the regulatory agency, the CFTC, on February 1st, while silver was finally moving upwards in the midst of the greatest buying spree in history? So maybe they might have felt protected that when the CFTC's acting commissioner, Rostin Benham, announced that he was on the prowl for any improper stuff. So that could create one perception that, yes, this is a safe place for you to commit your capital. But what he did not tell them was that apparently there was some sort of market structure that caps the price when it goes up, which was convenient for the banks that make up the LBMA, because many of them were the banks that were short. And I can only assume who Rostin was referring to when he said, dangerous situation that, really could have been a lot worse had the price not been tamped down and controlled. And we found in the LBMA's report that they explained exactly what that fear was, because their paper scheme was running out of metal, as was notated if you had seen the prospectus changes that happened on February 3rd. So would you say there's a similar parallel to any of that, Sean?
Yeah, it's enraging. I mean, didn't they also say, maybe you just said it there, I was looking for that Rothschild clip and I found the movie. It is called House of Rothschild. Yeah, 1934, and it does star Boris Karloff. Yeah, tamp down, tamp down, tamp down. Didn't Jeff Christian, or no, the other guy, one of them said it was the SLV that goes short.
That was Jeff Curry, yeah. And
Jeff Curry. None of it makes sense because we don't have a free market, right? So
that's how it makes sense. The only way it makes sense is that if you accept that it's a rigged game. And I'll tell you what, if somebody, accused me of that or had those questions, I wouldn't sit there and let them sit out there like that. Yeah, you You didn't tell me there were certain questions you could answer. How long does it take the CFTC's investigation? And I might add, these are the same guys. Remember, Gary Gensler had the investigation. He said he couldn't find anything. And then the same agency 8 years later says we found hundreds of thousands. And what's the rectification? Okay, fine. Maybe it was an honest mistake, but rather than, what's the training program to correct Gary? But instead, now he's running the SEC. And Sean, I heard, you know who one of the first, I believe it might have been actually, I'm not, it may, let's say the first commissioner of the SEC, possibly he wasn't the first, but you know who one of the classic ones was?
Who?
Appointed by FDR, Joseph Kennedy, right after the guy's bootlegging during the Prohibition era. I mean, well, gee, that's a great choice. I mean, maybe if Bernie Madoff's still alive, we could get him to come back and run the CFTC to restore the credibility. Is that a fair assessment of where we're at?
Well, I think the fairest assessment of where we're at is that, I guess if you're getting a bloody forehead from banging your head against the wall, then you should probably stop. And, maybe we should all just stop complaining about all of this and just go away and stop fighting. Stop fighting for truth. Stop fighting for free markets because it's a rigged system and we'll never take it back. That's what they want us to believe with this election we just had, this selection. I mean, here's the problem. And again, it's moral injury. We have an illegitimate government with an illegitimate president. Anybody with two brain cells rubbed together knows that man did not win. He did not get more votes than Donald
Sean,
Trump.
I gotta hop in for a second. Jeff Christian disputed that. And he said, I think he said, it was in the same video where I got a shout out. He said something like, anyone who thinks that any way that Trump didn't win the election or even consider such lunacy is a complete nut job. So there's just on one vote on the alternate.
Yeah, but that's how you know Jeff Christian is the ultimate shill. Okay, because he toes the official line on everything. Of course
He thinks Janet Yellen was a fantastic Fed chairwoman too. So he might, maybe he's just a Keynesian.
Yeah, and who butters his bread? Who feeds his family? I mean, the guy's not very intelligent.
About how Jay Aaron and he's associated with Goldman Sachs, and I know he's telling it about what a legend he is, and I think his clients are the banks. So that could be the answer. I don't know.
The thing about Jeff Christian is that he does not even come across as very intelligent. Okay? He bumbles, he stumbles, and he says dumb things like he did to the CFTC via that. Essentially, it was an online hearing. He appeared via Zoom, or at that time it was probably Skype. And he let the cat out of the bag by saying, oh, yeah, it's a no-brainer. I mean, of course, silver and the precious metals trade 100 to 1 the underlying physical. Of course they do. Well, that was sort of a bombshell, and I remember saying to a friend who didn't own any precious metals, I said, if you want to buy the most undervalued asset on planet Earth right now, you got to get some silver because this idiot at this, in a CFTC meeting, he just exposed himself in the whole Ponzi scheme. But of course we have a criminal government, so, nothing changes. The SEC doesn't, they fine JP Morgan, but nobody goes to jail, and JP Morgan continues to manipulate, or Goldman Sachs, or HSBC, or, pick your poison.
Well, I completely agree. And Sean, I can say firsthand that statement impacted me 10 years ago. I remember that was one of the things where early on when I was wondering what was going on, when I heard that and heard how then they uninvited the guys who did have evidence, it was like a little training for what I would run into years later. Sean, last question I have for you here today. Yeah, I've gotten like a snippet of what you've gotten to see for much longer. Because sometimes the best things you hear are when people are saying before or after recording. So what would you, for a special present for all the silver investors out there today, what is something you've heard that you can share that I would have no idea about? Give us one mind blower that you've heard in all the time you've doing this about silver, something silver related that would just shock people and leave them perplexed for the weekend.
I'm sure. You got to give me heads up on questions like that. Okay, well, the first thing that comes to mind is the most obvious thing, and it's not new to your audience, but it's new to, my friends and my neighbors who necessarily don't know this information. So throughout human history, silver to gold, the ratio has been 15 to 1 typically, sometimes as low as 12 to 1. So for every ounce of gold, you get 12 ounces of silver. Well, you know, when you talk to guys like Keith Newmeyer at First Majestic, he'll tell you getting the stuff out of the ground is a lot more rare than you might think. He estimates 9 to 10 ounces of physical silver are mined out of the ground for every 1 ounce of gold. And what do we see because of the manipulation? What's the silver to gold ratio today? 70, 72, 80? I mean, it's been as high as what, 120 recently. So, I mean, I think that's the craziest part. As they destroy our honest money with their currency, and then they inflate their currency away, thereby destroying our purchasing power even more, people are left not even realizing the history of these precious metals. And, you know, let me do another screen share here. I don't know if I have this queued up correctly, but it looks like this might be the Bank of England or the exchange floor. That's Boris Karloff as Lord Rothschild. Let's listen to this exchange because I think this is where the watershed selling, the waterfall selling began, thanks to Rothschild.
I bet you half a crown that Baring makes straight for this post within 2 minutes.
I'll take you, sir.
I'm tired of losing money. I'd like to win some.
You're a magician, sir. Here he is.
Mr. Rothschild, I don't have to tell you this is nothing less than slaughter. You know my position. I'm responsible for this new issue at 71, and you're making it impossible for me to put it on the market.
We're both bankers. You knew I ought to have had a share of this load. Why did you shut me out?
Certain pressure was brought to bear on me.
Ha! Ladrats.
Well, yes.
And let Ladrats speak for himself. All right, Mr. Baring. I'll come. I'll follow you. About how much has this thing cost us up to now?
About £5 million.
All right. We'll make 10.
Well, that wasn't queued up to exactly the right point, but that's where the selling began. Okay, so he was asking, how much has this cost me so far? 5 million pounds of selling. Well, let's make it 10 million pounds of selling and really put the pressure on everybody so they panic. And then that's what happened. And I just think it's fascinating because, you know, again, look at the big picture. The Rothschilds brag about that. They get Boris Karloff to play Rothschild in a very expensive movie in 1934, bragging about their exploits. Does anybody really think that Hollywood is telling us really anything other than propaganda? I mean, I think that was Hollywood's point and its reason for being from day one. So that's kind of what we're up against, man.
Well, actually, I'm going to disagree with you there. I think that they are telling you plenty, maybe not in the way that many might think. But Sean, have you ever seen a movie called Under the Silver Lake?
No.
I'll pay you an ounce of silver to watch that, and then we can talk about that one again. I think there's a lot of misleading stuff that's presented in the movies, yet when you learn to notice some of the things they slip in there, I'll just leave that at that. It's a fascinating science, though, and the ways that the media are used, because I think people are often afraid, like, well, they're going to come and do this and that. I don't think it's as much that. It's more the psychological impact. This is what was studied in MK Ultra and all those programs that have continued on ever since then. And that, fortunately, Sean, you've really been a leader in helping people like me to be aware of many of these schemes that are often so unbelievable. You wouldn't think that anyone would waste their time doing something so diabolical. Why not just, you know, like with less energy, you could create something positive to the world, which perhaps a message to any fellas out there that are involved in the deep state. It's never too late to change. And Sean, fortunately, you've written down all these things on a couple of your great websites. I have them pulled up here, but can you let folks know where they can go to get more information and support the things that you're doing?
Well, thanks, man. It's always nice talking with you. And you just said something there that resonates with me. I've said it before. I'll say it again. If we had benevolent dictators, okay, we don't want dictators at all, but we got them. If they were benevolent and they really loved humanity, the world could be an Eden. There's plenty of resources for all. The problem is these people are malevolent. Okay, they hate us. They're greedy. They want it all for themselves. And I think we're undergoing a depopulation agenda as we speak. So, I do try to cover a wide variety of topics, and if people appreciate that kind of information, they can find my videos posted at sgtreport.tv. That's a server beyond the reach of Big Brother censorship. SGTReport.com. There's a video bar right there. You can see it. My latest 3 videos are always posted in that video bar at the top of SGT Report. And then I have 2 other websites, thephaser.com and thelibertymill.com, which is kind of a Drudge Report style of information, and it's very, very truthy. Yeah, you can scroll down and see that, hover over those headlines and you can see how they pop up, which is kind of neat. So you can get sort of a synopsis and then decide if you want to click through and read it. And yeah, so trying to
You got
stay
some
alive.
Bush coverage there. What's he up to now?
Pardon?
Yeah, I see you have a Bush headline. I just finished reading The Bush Crime Family by Roger Stone, which was quite an experience. What is the Bush gang up to these days, Sean? What is he doing here?
Well, I don't know. I haven't read that particular article yet, but I would suspect that it's very much toe the line, just like Liz Cheney did for her criminal father. And you'll remember that Dick Cheney was really the head of the snake under Bush Jr. He was the vice president. A lot of people say he was the one pulling the strings, even as it relates to maybe the stand down on 9/11 specifically. Anybody that doesn't understand that event, look no further than World Trade Center 7 collapsing at free fall speed at 5:25 in the afternoon, and the BBC reporting about the collapse of that building 15 minutes before it collapsed. So, yeah, man, it is, I guess when we think deep state, that was the term coined by Peter Dale Scott. I think of people like George Bush Sr., the former director of the CIA, who was president, then his son becomes president. It's a little bit like Pierre Trudeau in Canada, then his son, or maybe not his son, maybe that was the Cuban dictator's son. But anyway, Justin Trudeau becomes president. Dick Cheney, an uber demon, and then Liz Cheney wants to sell out conservatives. It's a big club, man. It's a big malevolent club, and thank God you and I are not in it.
Well, I sure appreciate that, Sean. We'll have all those links in the description field below. And appreciate all that you stand for, all that you've done. And thanks for checking in, talking some silver. And it'll be interesting to see what's coming next.
Yeah, well, we'll keep our eye on the silver and gold market. At some point, people who have physical silver ought to be rewarded for their prescience, for their intelligence. We haven't been yet.
I think it's coming, and we'll look forward to celebrating soon.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for everybody, too, for listening.